This is the moment the entire global chessboard shifted. Not slowly, not quietly, but overnight in a city most people weren't even watching, St. Petersburg, Russia. If you were standing outside the Kremlin's diplomatic wing at 7:42 a.m. this Tuesday morning, you would have seen something that sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency in the Western world. Black cars, tight security, Iranian flags, and one very deliberate handshake that nobody in Washington was prepared for. As of 7:42 a.m. Tuesday, April 28, 2025, Vladimir Putin sat down with Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi, and what came out of that room did not just change the direction of nuclear talks. It rewrote the rules of the entire game. Iran, already bleeding under the weight of crushing economic sanctions, already cornered by a U.S. maximum pressure campaign that has been squeezing its oil exports for months, and already sitting on top of 450 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. Uranium that can be pushed to weapons grade in a matter of weeks, has just been handed a lifeline by the one man America feared would offer it, Vladimir Putin. In this deep dive, we are going to expose why Putin's move is not about diplomacy. We are going to show you what is really being negotiated behind closed doors. We are going to reveal who panicked first when the news broke. And we are going to explain why what happens in the next 72 hours could either prevent a catastrophic war or make it completely unavoidable. Iran isn't just talking to Russia. It is choosing Russia over America. And that choice changes everything. To understand why this moment is so devastating for the West, you have to go back to 2015. 10 years ago, the world thought it had solved the Iran nuclear problem forever. The plan was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The idea was elegant. Iran would give up 97% of its entire enriched uranium stockpile. The dangerous material would leave Iranian soil, travel to Russia, and be stored and monitored under full international supervision. Russia, specifically through its state nuclear agency Rosatom, would become the responsible custodian. The International Atomic Energy Agency would verify every step. Iran would keep its reactors. The world would keep its safety. And for 3 full years, the system worked perfectly. No violations, no diversions, no scandals. The IAEA signed off on Iranian compliance year after year. But the cost was not just political. It was symbolic. Iran had to surrender the one card that gave it real power at the negotiating table, its uranium. And large parts of the Iranian political establishment never forgave the leadership for making that trade. Then in 2018, Donald Trump tore up the deal. He reimposed sanctions. He called the agreement the worst deal ever made. He promised that his maximum pressure campaign would force Iran into an even better agreement, one that would permanently end its nuclear ambitions. Iran gambled that America would eventually return to the table on reasonable terms. It assumed that economic pain alone would not be enough to break its strategic patience. It assumed the West was unified. It assumed wrong. Because what happened instead was that Iran quietly, steadily, defiantly rebuilt its uranium stockpile. While the world was distracted by other crises, Iran enriched more uranium, reached higher percentages, and crossed threshold after threshold. By April 2025, Iran is not where it was in 2018. It is in a fundamentally more dangerous position. And the deal that once solved everything is now a distant memory. That is the world Putin just walked into. And that is exactly why his move this morning matters more than most people realize. At approximately 6:15 a.m. Tuesday, Abbas Araghchi's plane touched down in St. Petersburg. There was no press conference at the airport, no waving for cameras, just a quiet motorcade moving through early morning streets toward the venue where Putin was already waiting. For the first 20 minutes, there was nothing. No readout, no statement, no leak. Just silence from one of the most surveilled diplomatic meetings of the year. Then the Kremlin spoke. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov stepped in front of cameras and said the words that immediately triggered emergency calls in Washington, Brussels, and Tel Aviv. Russia's offer to take physical custody of Iran's enriched uranium, to remove it from Iranian soil, store it inside Russia, and process it under international monitoring is not just still alive. It is, in Peskov's exact framing, an active and standing proposal. Pause. Think about what that actually means. The United States has spent months, countless rounds of indirect talks, back-channel communications, diplomatic signals through Oman and Qatar, demanding one thing above everything else. Iran must remove its enriched uranium. Not pause enrichment, not dilute it. Remove it entirely. And here is Russia, calmly announcing to the world that it has already offered to do exactly that. While that announcement was landing in every newsroom on the planet, something else was also happening. Oil futures began climbing. Brent crude jumped 2.3% within 90 minutes of the Kremlin statement. Traders were not reading this as a peace move. They were reading it as a signal that the standoff is entering a new and unpredictable phase, one where the Strait of Hormuz remains a pressure point and where no one knows who controls the next move. And while markets were reacting, also happening simultaneously, U.S. officials were scrambling. According to sources familiar with the situation, a rapid consultation took place between senior State Department officials and White House national security advisors. The topic was not whether Russia's offer was genuine. The topic was far more alarming. The topic was, what happens if Iran says yes? Because here is what makes this moment catastrophic for Washington. Iran is not in a weak position anymore. It is in a position where it can publicly engage with Russia's proposal, force the United States to either accept or reject the mechanism on the world stage, and then use whatever Washington decides as a weapon in the next round of negotiations. The markets saw it, the intelligence agency saw it, and by 9 a.m. Tuesday morning, every senior diplomat in the Western Alliance was asking the same question. How did we get here? According to multiple reports from regional diplomatic sources, what happened before Araghchi even boarded his plane is just as important as the meeting itself. 48 hours before the St. Petersburg visit, Araghchi held a phone call with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. That call did not happen after consultations with European partners. It happened before them. China was briefed on Iran's strategic direction before the West even knew a major diplomatic move was coming. We have learned from sources tracking IAEA engagement that on April 24th, exactly 4 days before today's meeting, Russia and China held a formal coordination session with the International Atomic Energy Agency specifically focused on Iran's nuclear file. That meeting was not publicly announced. It surfaced through IAEA internal communications that were shared with regional governments. The sequence is not accidental. The IAEA meeting on April 24th was the alignment phase. Today's St. Petersburg visit is the execution phase. And China's complete public silence throughout all of it is not absence. It is strategy. Inside the meeting itself, the participants were Putin and Araghchi, supported by senior advisors from both foreign ministries. The topic, beyond uranium, was the fine print. The timeline for a potential transfer, the verification structure, the specific limitations on what Russia can do with the material once it receives it. Because that last point, what Russia does with Iran's uranium after taking custody, is the precise objection that caused Washington to reject the proposal the first time. A source described the atmosphere inside Russian diplomatic circles as one of cold, calculated patience. They are not rushing this. They do not need to rush. Because the longer this process extends without resolution, the stronger Russia's position becomes. And everyone in that room understood that arithmetic perfectly. Why is Russia doing this? The answer has almost nothing to do with goodwill and almost everything to do with leverage. Follow the incentives. Russia, through Rosatom, already controls a significant share of global uranium enrichment capacity. Western nations, including those in the European Union, have spent the past 3 years desperately trying to reduce their dependence on Russian nuclear fuel. If Moscow takes custody of Iran's 450-kilogram stockpile, processes it, and introduces it into the global nuclear fuel supply chain, it does not just solve a diplomatic crisis. It entrenches itself as an indispensable player in the global energy architecture for the next decade. This shifts power from Washington to Moscow in a domain, nuclear energy, where the United States has been trying to build its own alternative supply chains. Russia would go from being an adversary being squeezed by sanctions to being the country that prevented a nuclear war. That is not a minor rebranding. That is a generational geopolitical upgrade. Now consider what Washington's rejection actually costs. By saying no to Russia's mechanism, the United States is effectively telling the world that it wants Iran's uranium removed, but only through channels that do not exist. Iran will not hand its uranium to America. It will not trust France or Japan with material this sensitive. And destroying the uranium inside Iran would require a level of trust and access that no ceasefire has yet established. So the U.S. position, stripped of its diplomatic language, amounts to this: remove the uranium, but do it in a way that has no viable path forward. What historians will eventually call the uranium paradox, the moment America blocked its own solution, is playing out in real time. This is not a negotiating error. It is a strategic dilemma with no clean exit. The legal exposure is also growing. International law experts have begun pointing out that indefinite pressure on a nation with weapons-grade capable material, combined with a refusal to accept internationally supervised removal, creates a framework that Iran can use to justify almost any response. If Iran announced it was moving toward 90% enrichment and cited Washington's rejection of the Russian mechanism as the reason, the diplomatic argument would be brutal for the United States to counter. That is the reality of this morning's meeting. Russia is not just offering a service. It is offering a mirror and forcing Washington to look directly into it. Here is the domino effect. If Washington continues to reject the Russian mechanism, Iran keeps its uranium. If Iran keeps its uranium, the nuclear threshold gap keeps shrinking. If that gap keeps shrinking, the military option, which the United States and Israel have never fully taken off the table, becomes more tempting. If that option is exercised, the Strait of Hormuz becomes a war zone. If the Strait of Hormuz becomes a war zone, global oil supply contracts by an estimated 20% overnight. We are looking at an economic catastrophe that would make 2008 look manageable. Israel is watching this. Benjamin Netanyahu's government has made it explicitly clear in private communications, several of which have been referenced in Israeli press reporting, that any arrangement where Russia ends up holding Iranian uranium is viewed in Tel Aviv as strategically unacceptable. Not because it fails to remove the uranium, but because it positions Russia as the permanent guarantor of Iran's nuclear future. While all of this is playing out diplomatically, Russia is also accumulating a financial windfall. During the peak of recent Hormuz disruptions, Moscow was earning an estimated several hundred million euros per day in elevated energy revenues. Every day the conflict remains unresolved is another day of extraordinary profit for Kremlin-aligned energy interests. Russia, in other words, wins whether the deal happens or not. If it happens, Russia gains geopolitical prestige. If it doesn't, Russia gains cash. And China's position mirrors this perfectly. Beijing, represented in this process by Wang Yi's quiet back-channel coordination, has said nothing publicly. But its behavior tells the complete story. China continues purchasing Iranian oil at below-market prices, giving Tehran the economic oxygen it needs to maintain its negotiating patience. China participated in the April 24th IAEA coordination meeting. And China benefits directly from every week that the United States appears unable to close this crisis. Reports from sources close to the Iranian Foreign Ministry describe Araghchi as operating with unusual confidence. He is not the nervous negotiator of 2022. He is a man who knows that his country holds two offers on the table: the Hormuz proposal through Pakistani mediators that gives Washington a fast win on global markets, and the uranium mechanism through Russia that solves the core nuclear issue. Iran built two exit ramps. America has not taken either one. And Araghchi is making sure that every capital watching this situation understands exactly who is offering solutions and exactly who is refusing them. The coalition fracture this creates inside the Western alliance cannot be overstated. European nations dependent on stable energy markets are quietly expressing frustration with Washington's position. Gulf states that have normalized relations with Israel are watching the clock. And every country that was counting on American diplomatic leadership to close this file before it becomes a military crisis is now recalculating whether that leadership is actually going to arrive. The phone is sitting on the table. Donald Trump talked about it. He said there is a line of communication, a clear path forward, a call that could start the final chapter of this crisis. That phone has not rung, and every hour it stays silent, the world moves further from a negotiated solution and closer to something far worse. So where are we right now? Iran is in St. Petersburg, coordinating with a country it signed a 20-year strategic partnership with just 3 months ago. A partnership covering military cooperation, economic integration, and deep political alignment. Russia is holding the uranium mechanism in one hand and its energy windfall in the other. China is sustaining Iran's patience from the background, invisible but indispensable. And the United States is waiting, announcing it wants a deal, insisting on conditions, but not picking up the phone and not accepting the one mechanism that has actually worked before. The paradox of this moment is devastating. America holds the most military and economic power of any player in this crisis. And yet it is the least able to move the situation toward resolution. The country with the most leverage is effectively paralyzed, not by lack of options, but by the cost of accepting any of them. As we move into the next critical 72 hours, expect Iran to do something very deliberate. It will not announce anything dramatic. It will let the images from St. Petersburg circulate. It will let the Kremlin's statement about the standing uranium offer echo through every news cycle. And then, through quiet intermediaries, Pakistani diplomats, Omani back channels, trusted regional voices, it will send Washington a very simple message. The solution is ready. The mechanism is built. We are not waiting forever. What cannot be undone is the narrative that is forming right now. Iran has shown willingness. Russia has provided the tool. China has provided the patience. The United States has provided the rejection. That story, written by the events of this single Tuesday morning, will shape how every future negotiation is framed, how every ally calculates its positioning, and how history eventually judges this moment. The uranium is still in Iran. The clock is still running. And the one offer that could have ended this, cleanly, peacefully, verifiably, is still sitting on a table in St. Petersburg, waiting for an answer that Washington has so far refused to give. Subscribe, because in the next 48 hours, this either moves toward the most consequential diplomatic deal of the decade, or it collapses entirely into something none of us want to imagine. We will be tracking every development, every statement, every back-channel signal in real time. If Iran makes its next move before Washington responds, we will break it down the moment it happens. Watch closely. This is not background noise. This is the moment that decides what comes next.